Join me on my mission to create a new tomorrow as I chat with industry experts, elite athletes, thought leaders, and government officials about how we activate our vision for a better world. We may agree and we may disagree, but I'm not backing down. I'm Gronich, and this is Create a New Tomorrow podcast. Welcome back to another episode of Create a New Tomorrow. I am your host, Gronich, and today I have with me Brian McKibben. Brian is an attorney turned author of children's books. And I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about that story of how he went from that transition. So Brian, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about that transition of how you went from an attorney who specializes in mediation to an author writing children's books.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I didn't expect to take that transition. When I went to school, I was always sort of funneled into this career, and I discovered I liked being what I sort of call an anti-lawyer more than a lawyer. So that's why I became a mediator, because you're trying to put people back together rather than in litigation. You're essentially trying to tear them apart. It's in your best interest as a lawyer to keep the fight going because you keep getting paid. It's in the client's best interest to settle the case because that's what they're going to do at the end. I found I didn't like fighting. I liked peacemaking, and so that was a transition in my own career. And I think with that mindset, I've always wanted to be a writer, but when I was younger, I thought I would write thrillers, and I guess with that more sort of serious adult mindset that you might say is in the lawyer's typical head. When I became a mediator, it's about shifting perspective and generally about bringing happiness. And I think that all sort of coincided then with the little thing that happened to me in lockdown, where some local kids
calling it lock time. Somebody may not know what that means.
Oh, sorry, that's just my accent. Lockdown during the pandemic, when we were all told to stay home. Some local kids decided to cheer us up, I guess, and they would ring the bell. You know, the little game children play, ring the doorbell and run away. But when you came to answer the door, the first time I came, it was very surprising because I looked down and there was a little bouquet of flowers. So they'd left these little flowers that they'd picked, and they tied them up with a bit of sort of coarse grass, and then they came back over a few days, and it became apparent that they wanted to play a little game and for me to talk to them. So I did, and then gradually these little heads would come out from where they were hiding, and we would play this game that I would pretend not to see them and still talk to them, you know, as if I'm talking to thin air. And this went on for a few months. And when I was taking walks, we have some woodland behind where we live. The idea of a story came to me. And so I started to write this book called The Flower Fairies as a result of this sort of little inciting incident. Mm-hmm. And then I got a bit of writer's block with that after a while. And luckily enough for me, one of my characters in the story had this pet dachshund, and one day the story about one of the adventures of the little dog came to me instead, and that one flew. I'm still writing the other book. It's still in development, I guess you'd say, but Siggy the dachshund was born, and I've written about half a dozen of those stories now. 2 of them are published, and there's a sequence ready to go. So that was the transition, really. Partly mindset, and then partly a little bit of luck, I guess, and a little bit of inspiration from some lovely little kids that, you know, came like the flower fairies, you know, to deliver some flowers for us and cheer us up.
That's pretty cool. I like hearing those stories of what people have done during this particular craziness in order to create joy and create happiness, and so that's really cool. What I'm interested in, what I talk to you about a lot in our pre-interview is the differences in perception between tearing things apart, putting things back together, peacemaking versus ripping away. And how does that relate to your book? Yes. But more importantly for me is like, let's dive deep into the perceptions and the things that people, you know, could get benefit from in this time of like the world feels like it's being torn apart
Yeah.
instead of being brought together. So
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that, isn't there? When you're a litigation attorney, as I said before, you know, the profit motive is always there. So when you talk to a client, if they have a dispute, you're always telling them about a kind of fictitious best case scenario. You know, ultimately that's why there's so many, you know, court step settlements, because it's only in the couple of days before the trial that your lawyer starts to level with you, and then everyone's disappointed to find that they're not going to score, you know, 100-0 here. There's going to be a compromise, and I think, you know, the way that the world feels at the moment is a wee bit like that, where there's just so much angst and so many people saying so many things that aren't, you know, that aren't true or aren't verifiably true, and there's a lot of disinformation, and I think people are probably quite, I know I am quite angst-ridden at times when I'm watching the news. In mediation, if I was sort of mediating that kind of situation, it's about trying to change your headspace and have a different perspective on things, and a little bit like in the books, to find that little bit of joy somewhere, because it's always there. It just depends how you think about a particular event. I mean, obviously there can be just events where it's a complete catastrophe. So I'm not really talking about something that, you know, like a bereavement perhaps, or something like that. But something that's made you angry is something that you can choose. You can choose your reaction. You can choose if you're going to go apoplectic and start yelling at the television and throwing things at it,
right,
or you can just let it be and, you know, and get on with your life. You know, in disputes, that's a picture that I try and paint for my clients, that if they can reconcile the anger that they're feeling with a different perception of what could happen later today when they walk out of the door, without the rancor and without the weight of this dispute, doesn't the second thing feel better? You know, being able to go on with your precious life, because it's finite, and, you know, how many days more are you going to waste, or months or years, and money?
So let me take you to a dark place. Okay, let's take you to a dark place. This is something that has been going on for centuries.
Sure.
And I'll give you a little background. So I had a roommate who was a Palestinian Muslim, and she was like my sister. I'm Jewish.
Sure.
Right? She and I would have amazing conversations. We would get into the meat and deep and dark and dirty in the conflict, right? But we had the perspective of, you're my sister, I'm your brother, and no matter what we say here, right, we will always be connected that way. And so we had a way of speaking to each other that was kind and yet forceful in our own belief system. So we were able to get these things out. So my question to you would be, let's go to that kind of a big picture. If you were mediating the you know, Palestinian-Israeli conflict, right? Something that's been going on for decades, and that nobody seems to have been able to get through. And I'm saying this because I didn't want to say mask versus not mask, or vax versus not vaxxed, right? COVID versus not COVID, conspiracy versus, you know, the industry is amazingly, you know, perfect and would never try to hurt you.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about the really deep stuff. I'm talking about just this conflict, right?
Yeah, just this little conflict.
Just this little one. So let's mediate this in a way that brings both sides together. Let's look at what would you do as a mediator in that situation?
I think one of the skills the mediator tries to bring is to talk to people in a way that that makes sense to them, to help them reframe stuff, to help them think about perspective, but also to get their buy-in that the mediator's sincere. So in this, it's a nice example you've picked for me, because I grew up in Northern Ireland. So the Protestant Catholic conflict there is quite similar, and you know, in many ways it really is. You know, it's a lot of people look in on the Palestinian Israeli conflict and see it as a Jewish Muslim thing, and there's an element of that, but my sense is that it's not just about that. Or you know, there's a lot of nuance. The same thing in Northern Ireland. People think that it's just Protestants fighting Catholics, but there's a big proportion of people in the middle, rather than the people that you see shouting and fighting at either end. So what I think I would do to start with is to try and reflect to both. We call them participants in mediation, not parties, because party is slightly pejorative or divisive. So I would talk to my participants each separately, because it's part of the trust building, rather than throw them into. Mediators differ in this. I don't favor throwing them straight into a room together, because I feel that's a lot of tension and a lot of anxiety that they're going to feel initially. So I come and talk to them, and hopefully I lower the temperature a little bit with each of them. And so that's how I would start, is to try and reflect my own experience and help them, I hope, see that maybe I can have a useful perspective on their problem. And I've also some lived experience that they can believe in, that might make it worthwhile listening to me and what I might try to say to them.
Okay.
That's how I'd start anyway.
Right. So let's go deeper on that. So the first idea is to gather understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding in the mediator's point of view is going to calm tension. So,
yep.
Right. So the first idea is the middle party that has no say in the situation, no stake, so to speak,
yep.
is going to be the learning phase. So we're learning and understanding about the other party. Now, what's next?
Well, that phase goes into Sieg's sort of neatly into listening to what they want to tell you. Part of the process at that point is for them to feel heard. So you listen and you would reflect what they're saying, so that they can understand that you're hearing them, and also that you're understanding what they're saying.
Right. So that technique is called active listening, correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes. And from there, you would start to have an element where you would ask for permission to play devil's advocate. And when you're doing that, then you would be going through a process of trying to put into their head the way that they, having listened to them, trying to help them imagine how the people in the other room are feeling, and how the sense of their anger about whatever it is quite similar to that. And in talking to them about their ideal solution, and then trying to elicit some sense of, I hesitate to say sympathy. Ultimately, you want some sympathy. But in a charged situation like that, that's a step. So it might take a while to get there. Right. But at least a little bit of empathy, yes.
Right. So do you want sympathy or empathy?
Well, empathy will come first. Sympathy, in the end, sympathy doesn't matter so much, because, well, it depends what solution you're looking for. You know, if you want, you know, if you want this sort of solution where one set of people on one side marry their daughter to the other set's son, you probably need the sympathy. But if you just want people to live together, a little bit of empathy will do. It certainly will go a long way to getting to some sort of agreed solution.
Okay, so let's just I'm just breaking it down into the bits, right? So we do the learning about, we do the understanding the situation, we do the asking of questions and repeating back, the active listening, repeating back what you're hearing.
Yes.
So in a conflict like Palestine, Israel, right, we kind of have an idea of how people are feeling. On one side, they're feeling repressed and oppressed and controlled, and like their land is being taken from them. On the other side, you got people who feel like their entire world is always being attacked and destroyed, and they need a safe haven to be able to live and not, you know, have people wanting to kill them all the time, right? So you have these two different places where people are, and both sides very valid, right? So now we have an understanding. Okay, so next, where do you get to? How do you get from whining about the problems, right, into collaborating for solutions and successes?
Yeah. Well, you would have asked them a little bit further backwards about what an ideal solution will look like, and then you'll have reality tested and played devil's advocate with that a little bit, so that you might have knocked some of the totally unrealistic parts of what the ideal solution, a bit like, well, you know, if we were talking about litigation, it comes down to numbers, but it'll help to knock out some of what, you know, the fantasy elements the lawyer might have told them that we can get you, because it's not, I mean, you know, it can go on to trial, and who knows, you might have the perfect judge, but in reality, it's very unlikely. So you would sort of try to narrow that ideal solution into something that begins to vaguely look like something the other side could at least look at without totally freaking out. And you'd be generally, as a mediator, I'll be going from the room with the Palestinian people to the room with the Jewish people. And as the process goes along and we're talking about solutions, you would start to get to the place where you're hoping that they'll start to make an offer, and then you will start to talk to the other room about this offer. And the first offer will obviously be a bridge or two too far, but you know, you put it to them totally neutrally, because I like to say, as a mediator, I'm not in favor. I'm not against anybody. I'm omni.
Right. You have no stake.
Yeah. Totally no stake. I'm not in any way biased, so I will just put the offer. This is what they've said. Occasionally, I will ask them, "Is it okay to tell them this snippet of information?" This sort of, if you like, that I'm the neutral insider in both camps, so I can help, and that's part of the negotiation process. And hopefully, if both rooms really want to find a solution, and again, that's kind of crucial, you start the whole process with getting agreement that we're both here today to work, you know, really hard to find the solution, whatever it is.
Okay. So now I'm gonna take it a little bit further. So you have two rooms of people with like 5 people in each room, let's say. Okay. So 4 of the people in each of those rooms really like the solutions. 1 in each of those rooms is going to sabotage, like they're looking to sabotage. How do you get those people involved in the solution process? Because what I see is, like, you have the people who really want peace.
Yeah.
The politicians and the people who want power are the ones who have stifled in some way or another the peace. And this is the systems in America, black and white. This is the systems everywhere else, you know, that divide us.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at a group of people and I see somebody who doesn't want to compromise, who doesn't want to have an affect of solution, how do you create a solution that that is long lasting
Mhm.
when there's like those little elements on either side that can't seem to let go?
Sure. I mean, that is the $1 million question in our scenario here, isn't it? You know, when I'm litigating, when I'm mediating litigation, it always comes down to numbers, and that's very convenient because that can be you can make that as a sort of a non-emotive thing. It's just, you know, it's a trade. In our scenario here, it's very difficult. If somebody's going to be totally intransigent, I mean, mediation relies on goodwill. It's a process of building that goodwill and for people to engage with it. If somebody's going to completely, if they're not going to engage with the process at all, it's hard for you to move that final stone. I guess the techniques that you would use is try to gain their agreement, their agreement out loud with the other people about what sorts of things they want, because that's a good technique insofar as once people have stated a position out loud in front of people with witnesses, they don't like to go back on that. So if you can move them towards some sort of common ground with the rest of their peers, then you might get somewhere. Ultimately, though, if they're so dug in, they're never going to want to come out. It's difficult, and I guess in our scenario, you know, that's kind of where we are. Having said that, you know, if you take Northern Ireland as an example, you get, I mean, we Northern Ireland's, you know, that it's still a knotty thing. If you see at the moment, there's still shenanigans go on, but nevertheless, you know, the peace happened there where people stopped killing each other. So, or for the most part, at least. So, you know, that was a massive step forward,
Right.
and it really required.
How did that happen?
Well, it happened over a period of years. So the mediation I do is designed to happen in one day. I think that would be a big trick to pull off in our scenario here. So over a period of a much longer time, the trust that needed to be built was built insofar as each of those sides felt it was possible for them to make a move beyond anything they could have imagined before. So for the IRA, that would have been giving up their guns and their explosives and having that verifiably done. On the other side, on the unionist side, it was believing that was going to happen, and you know, they weren't going to, you know, they weren't. When I was a child, you know, you used to get these things they called, all of the terminology around the Troubles, even the Troubles itself is so sort of Irishly euphemistic, you know, the Troubles. It sounds like a bit of an argument that you had with somebody over the fence. And we used to have these things called bomb scares. So essentially, that was where somebody had planted a bomb in a shopping center or something, and it was evacuated in a semi-panic, and you ran away. It's just a bomb scare. I can remember things like that. So anyway, the other side were brought to a point where they could believe that those sort of things, and you know, the violence would stop, and they believed that it would. And then they had to also agree or come to a mindset that they were willing to. It's all about compromise. The settlement's not about getting everything you want if it's going to happen. It's about finding something you can live with. And in the end, both sides agreed that it was worth people not dying. That was a bigger prize than it was to hold on to weapons and an ideology that required violence to achieve the result instead of a democratic means. On the other side, it was about trust that the democratic means was going to be the way forward rather than the violence, I guess. And the process all the way along was taking them to that place where they could climb out of the trench and see the clear land in front of them, instead of, you know, this obscured view that they had that made it difficult for them to believe it was possible to get out of the trench.
So, you know, here's like the bottom line of what I hear is the incentive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What are the incentives that you're offering for me to stop my behavior?
Yes.
Basically. And hey, I must have gotten that right.
I like it.
Noise every now and then just appears. So if the incentives are the things that get people to change,
mm-hmm.
right? Let's go back to a mask or no mask. Like there are some people, they will absolutely, there's no incentive that you could give somebody who doesn't want to wear a mask to wear it. There's no incentive that you could give somebody who's afraid for their lives and wears 2 or 3 masks just to take off the mask, right? At that point.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get those people who are never going to agree, never going to understand each other, never going to be on the same page, to at least be in a place of understanding and not trying to control one or the other, right?
Yeah.
So this is a big one these days. This cancel culture, this what they call it, virtue signaling, or morality signaling, and so it's like, I got vaccinated, I didn't get vaccinated. I'm going to be really excited about having gotten vaccinated. I'm going to be really excited about having not gotten vaccinated, right? There's this virtue signaling. So how do we get these two people to just say, yeah, you do you and I do me, and we could both be really excited about who each other is?
Yeah.
Right? Instead of the way that it's been along.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it comes back to the empathy again. You know, when you look at issues like that, or I mean, the last American election was very like that, wasn't it? It seemed to, this last sort of 5 years or so seems to have been a period of time where it's very polarized. You know, it's an either or on whichever side you're standing. You know, the other side is demonized, and we seem to have lost that empathy. You know, I don't know whether it's the age that we live in, and the internet makes it easy to comment, and because you're not speaking to somebody face to face, you can say quite nasty things on your keyboard that you'd never say, or you know, unless you were really drunk or very mad, you'd never say to somebody's face unless you're expecting a fight. You know, a little bit like you do in your car, I guess. You know, you're sort of insulated in this, so you can swear at somebody and you're past it, and there's no consequence, I guess, is the thing. Anyway, the lack of empathy that I think that we had more of in the past, just as a natural sort of way of being. I think if we're going to alleviate this polarization, you know, we all have common interests and shared goals. I mean, in terms of masks or not masks, I mean, one place you could start is that, you know, I was going to say nobody wants anybody to die, but I suppose sometimes at the far ends of the polarization, that's maybe not all that totally accurate. But by and large, you know, nobody wants anybody else to die. So that's maybe something you can agree on. And I guess that's the sort of thing that you start to try and put together is a set of things that everybody can agree that, you know, we want our kids to be safe, and we want our schools to be safe, and workplaces, and for people not to be in fear. And people don't generally like to fight, you know, so there's a lot of shared values around stuff like that, but all of them require a little bit of empathy, because if you can't find any shred of something where you could care at all about the other person, it's going to be difficult to stop that sort of animosity, I think.
Right. So as a mediator, you've got to be well aware of human emotions and the things that drive people forward,
Yeah,
right? So
definitely.
this show is all about creating a new tomorrow and
Mhm.
activating our vision for a better world. You did that when you got caught up in the lockup and decided, I want to become an author while I'm sitting here waiting to, have things to mediate.
Yes.
And so you wrote a book about a children's book about kind of what you do in mediation. So
Yeah.
why don't you just let's talk about kids,
Hmm.
because kids are going through amazing amounts of bullying online, cyberbullying and things
Yeah.
like that. And I want to get to that kid because you did write a book about, a children's book. So how do we teach? I have a 7-year-old. How do I teach my son? He's already pretty empathetic, right? But how do I teach him how to mediate in his own mind, right?
Sure.
How to create that mediation mindset in his own mind now so that when he's an adult, it's in second nature to him to be in that state of empathy.
Yeah.
How could other parents do that as well?
I think, I mean, as you said, children are much better disposed than some adults to forgive and forget, and to make friends again. You can see when they fall out and have a fight, they can be best friends in a few minutes, maybe over an ice cream or something. I guess with that as an example, it's a shared experience that brings them back together and makes them happy again. I would say for children, it's very good for them in general to you know to excite their curiosity about things. And one of the ways to do that is to have them imagine how other people feel about this or that. And I think that's the sort of headspace that you want them to inhabit, because that's the kind of place where if they're angry at someone, but they can start to perceive why that person may have acted the way that they did and have a little bit of empathy or even sympathy with that, then they can't remain engaged with the anger. And I think somewhere there is the answer um, to helping them be better adults and calmer, gentler, happier people. I
Awesome.
think.
So talk to us a little bit about the few lessons in this book. Siggy loves sausage, and
Yeah.
and I want to end. I always end the show with 3 tips and tricks and things that people can do to activate their vision to make a better world, to have a better world. And
Okay.
so, why don't you talk about Siggy loves sausage and the philosophies and things that will help others to create their new tomorrow and activate their vision for a better world?
Okay, thank you. Well, Siggy Loves Sausages is about it's about a little quest that this Dachshund goes on, but ultimately he goes on it because he makes a promise to a friend to help them out. Along the way, he has temptations to overcome. That's the tasty foodstuffs that he has to ignore to get his goal. He has a little help getting his goal because basically because he's a good-hearted little creature, and there's a fairy that decides he deserves a little bit of help for that. Then when he accomplishes the goal and he returns this item to its rightful owner, again ignoring the temptations along the way back, he's rewarded with a sausage, and the payoff line is that there's nothing a sausage dog loves more than sausages, even though he loves all this other stuff. So it's about keeping your promises and being a good person, I guess. And the idea that there's happiness in in that kind of mindset, in similar, I guess, to, at Christmas, the joys in the giving stuff rather than receiving it, really, isn't it? So I guess that's the lesson in the book, and something that I hope parents would want their kids to take away, that, selflessness is better than selfishness.
Okay, so fulfillment from giving. That's awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave the audience with? How they could, maybe better mediate themselves? How could they understand themselves more?
Sure.
And thereby understand others more?
Yeah.
What kind of questions can they ask themselves to get to that point? So I just want to give the audience a little bit more love so that they can really activate their visions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, we all want to be happy, and I think that we spend a lot of time in the world today looking at screens and seeing. I mean, the news wants to. The news is the bad news industry, really, not the good news industry, isn't it? It's you get higher ratings with the angst than you do with the sunflowers. I would say to people that. I think that one thing is true, and with their kids as well, is to try and go outside and see nature, because nature just is. Nature's got no angst. If you go into the forest, the trees are there and they're magnificent and beautiful, and they're not fighting. It's very difficult to be angry in a forest after a while. If you're with your child, the child would start to be fascinated with nature and forget about his smartphone and his computer games. And I think that's a great way. Just go on a walk in nature, and it's hard to hold on to that anger. And in the doing of that, your head will clear a little as well of the angst or the anger or whatever it was that made you go outside to get a bit of relief from that. And I think we should all do that. I've been trying to do that every day since the pandemic happened, and I've found it really useful. That would be my top tip. Go out into nature. It's always good.
Thank you so much for being here, Brian. I really appreciate all your wisdom, your ability to pivot and show that resilience as well in the face of what we've been going through is amazing and commendable. And so I really appreciate you being on the show.
It's been my great pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely.